My name is Rebecca Stanton, and I was 33 years old when I learned that staying calm in an emergency is different from staying calm when your own life starts falling apart. I had spent 10 years working in emergency communications, and by then I was a supervisor at a 911 dispatch center in Raleigh, North Carolina. Every shift taught me how to listen carefully, separate panic from facts, and make decisions before fear took over. I used to think that skill would protect me from almost anything. Caleb Monroe and I had been together for 3.5 years and engaged for 8 months. Our wedding was 3 months away, and most big decisions were already behind us. The townhouse belonged to me, and Caleb had moved in after we got engaged, bringing small routines that made the place feel shared. We kept most of our finances separate, but we had one wedding fund for the venue, catering, and photographer. Our relationship was not perfect, but it felt solid. Caleb worked as a counselor at a middle school, and I understood that some weeks left him drained. Lately, though, he had started talking more about college friends who traveled often and changed jobs without worrying about mortgages or schedules. I assumed he was nervous about marriage, not questioning us. That spring, my schedule became harder, so I traded several shifts to protect weekends for wedding planning. When Caleb mentioned an alumni weekend at his old college, I could not go because I was working, so I encouraged him to attend alone. I thought time with old friends might help him relax before the final stretch of planning. When he came home, he seemed lighter than he had in weeks. He talked about familiar places, old classmates, and stories I had heard before. Then he casually mentioned Mallory Price, the woman he had dated during his last year of college. I knew her name, but I had never considered her a threat. Meeting Mallory was not what changed everything. What changed everything was the Caleb who came home afterward. The small lies started sounding reasonable enough that I had to remind myself reasonable did not always mean true. Caleb began keeping his phone face down whenever we ate together. Twice that week, he stepped into the garage to answer calls after 10 at night. When I asked who needed him that late, he said it was a parent situation from school and reminded me that some conversations were confidential. I wanted to accept that explanation because his job involved sensitive problems. I also did not want to search his phone looking for evidence, so I watched the changes instead. Caleb started listening to college playlists, pulled an old university hoodie from storage, and talked more about who he had been before work. Bills and wedding plans filled his calendar. One evening, while we were choosing dishes for the rehearsal dinner, his phone lit up beside him. He glanced down, smiled, then turned the screen away. I asked if it was Mallory. Caleb paused long enough for me to notice, then said they had been talking about old friends and that I was turning something harmless into a problem because I was stressed about the wedding. That answer bothered me more than I wanted to admit. My job depended on hearing what people were not saying, noticing hesitation, changes in tone, and details that did not fit. Yet inside my home, I kept explaining away every silence because I loved the person creating it. I began wondering whether exhaustion was making me suspicious, exactly as Caleb suggested. A few days later, Caleb told me he had made a dinner reservation for Thursday night. He said we needed a conversation before we got married. For the first time in weeks, I felt relieved because I thought he was ready to tell me what had been bothering him. I still believed we were walking into that restaurant to solve a problem together. I wore my engagement ring that night, without questioning whether it belonged on my hand. What I did not understand was that Caleb had not planned that dinner to save our wedding. He wanted me to keep the wedding waiting while he decided whether he wanted another life. He did not ask to break up with me. What Caleb asked for was worse because he wanted to keep me while deciding whether he wanted someone else more. We had barely ordered when he told me that he and Mallory had been talking for almost 7 weeks. He said there had been no physical affair, but they had called each other at night, talked about college, and wondered whether they had ended things too soon. I asked him one question. "What do you want from me?" Caleb took a breath and said he thought we should pause everything for 90 days. He did not want me to cancel the venue, tell our families, return my ring, or make any final decisions. Then I asked the question that mattered. During those 90 days, are you going to keep talking to Mallory? He looked down and said yes, because if he ignored those feelings now, he was afraid they would follow him into our marriage. That was when I understood this was not a request for space. Caleb tried to explain what he had been feeling. He said that with me. He could already see our life 5 years from now. With a mortgage, Saturday errands, dinner reservations, and school calendars. With Mallory, he remembered who he had been before everything became practical. I sat there listening as the future I had worked to build was described like evidence that his life had become too predictable. I asked if he really expected me to wear his ring while he figured out whether another woman made him feel more alive. Caleb said he was only asking for time, and that 90 days could protect us from making a permanent mistake. I slowly removed my engagement ring and placed it on the table between us. Then I told him he did not get to try another future while asking me to keep this one warm for him. His face changed immediately. He said, "Rebecca, I am not ending this." I told him he did not have to because I was. Caleb had walked into that restaurant believing he was asking for a pause, but I finally understood that he had already made a choice long before I took off the ring that night. The next morning, I did not wake up wondering whether Caleb had changed his mind. I made coffee, opened my laptop, and called the venue before I could talk myself out of it. Then I contacted the caterer and photographer and canceled those contracts too. By noon, the wedding we had spent months planning no longer existed on anyone's calendar. The cancellations cost us about $5,400 in non-refundable fees. Caleb and I had contributed almost equally to the wedding fund, so I made a simple record of every payment and every loss. I deducted the cancellation costs from the shared balance, then divided what remained according to what each of us had put in. I sent him the statement because I wanted nothing about the breakup to become another argument later. Caleb called as soon as he learned the venue was gone. He kept saying that 90 days did not mean the engagement was over, as if repeating it could restore everything I had canceled. I told him that maybe it had not meant the end to him, but it did to me. He had asked for a waiting period, and I had chosen not to spend 3 months waiting to see whether I was still wanted. A few days later, Caleb came back for most of his belongings while my brother Daniel was there with me. Caleb kept saying I was making everything too final and that we could still slow down before doing something we regretted. I told him an engagement was not a waiting room where one person could leave, explore another relationship, and expect the other person to keep their seat. He packed quietly after that, and Daniel helped carry the last boxes outside. When our families began asking why the wedding was canceled, I kept my answer short. Caleb had asked to pause our engagement so he could explore his feelings for someone from his past, and I had decided not to wait. That evening, I put the wedding binder into a storage box and closed the lid. The hardest part was not losing the deposits. It was admitting that the man I planned to marry had expected me to remain available while he decided whether I was enough. Later, Caleb texted that he hoped I would understand why he needed certainty someday. What Caleb did not understand was that he had gambled a real marriage on a relationship Mallory had never called love. For the first few weeks after the breakup, I focused on work, sleep, and getting used to a quiet house. The strange part was how quickly anxiety faded. I was hurt, but I was no longer wondering who Caleb was calling after 10 at night. About 3 weeks later, Erin called me. She sounded uncomfortable and asked what had happened between Caleb and me. Caleb had told his parents that he only needed a little space before the wedding and that I had canceled everything overnight. I did not defend myself for long. I told her about the 90 days, Mallory, and the fact that Caleb expected me to remain engaged while he kept talking to her. Erin went quiet. Then she asked if her brother had really expected me to wait while he figured out whether he wanted someone else. I told her yes. A few days later, She called again and said she had confronted Caleb during dinner with their parents. This time, he admitted what he had asked me to do. That changed the story inside his family. But it did not change anything for me. By then, Caleb was trying to turn his connection with Mallory into something official. That was when his plans started falling apart. Mallory told him that talking again had reminded her of who they had been in college, but she had never promised him a future. Caleb told her that she had admitted she still had feelings for him. Mallory did not deny that, but she told him feelings were not the same as building a life together. She also admitted that flirting with an engaged man had crossed a line. What she refused to do was take responsibility for the choice Caleb had made after those conversations. That was the part Caleb had never prepared for. He had treated Mallory like an open door when she had only been looking back at an old room. He had risked our engagement for a possibility he had turned into a promise in his own mind. Not long after that, my phone lit up with a message from him. He wrote that he thought he had misunderstood a lot of things. I read it once, then put my phone down without answering. When Caleb came back, he was no longer talking about needing space. He said he had made a mistake and wanted to explain what had happened. It had been almost 2 months since our engagement ended, and he asked if he could come by for papers and things he had left behind. I agreed to meet him on the front porch, but I did not invite him inside. He looked tired, but not broken. And I was glad, because I did not need him destroyed to know I had made the right choice. Caleb started with an apology. He said Mallory did not want a relationship, that he had confused nostalgia with something real, and that he had started therapy. Then he said, "Rebecca, I chose wrong." I shook my head. "No, you did not choose the wrong person. You chose to treat me like an option you could come back to." He tried to tell me that he had only needed clarity. So I asked him one question. If Mallory had said yes, would you be standing on this porch today? Caleb opened his mouth, then stopped. He looked down at the papers in his hands and said nothing. That silence answered more than any apology could have. I told him he had wanted protection from losing both possibilities at once. He said he never meant to hurt me. I told him intention did not erase consequence. He had wanted me to keep wearing his ring while he explored a life with someone else, and he had expected me to call that patience. I could not return to a relationship where that request had seemed reasonable to him. Caleb asked if we could start over slowly, without an engagement, and just see where things went. I told him no. Mallory was not the reason I could not take him back. The reason was that he had looked directly at me and believed I should wait while he decided whether I was still the future he wanted. He stood quietly for a moment, then thanked me for agreeing to talk. I handed him the papers, and he picked up the box he had come for. There was no shouting and no argument. I watched him walk to his car. Then I went inside and closed the door myself. The weekend that was supposed to be my wedding finally arrived, and I was surprised by how little I wanted to hide from it. 3 months earlier, I had imagined that date would break me. Instead, I had already enrolled in an emergency leadership certification program I had postponed while planning the wedding. For the first time in a long time, I was making plans that belonged only to me. My brother Daniel and his wife invited me to spend the weekend with their family in Asheville. At first, I said no because I did not want the trip to become some kind of anti-wedding celebration. I did not want everyone watching me, waiting to see if I cried when the hour of the ceremony passed. Then I realized I actually wanted to go, not to escape the date, but because I wanted time with people I loved. The drive felt easier than I expected. We talked about work, their daughter, and ordinary things that had nothing to do with Caleb. At one point, I noticed the afternoon had passed without me thinking about where I would have been if the wedding had happened. I was not counting backward from the ceremony or imagining the dress hanging in a room somewhere. Erin and I still spoke occasionally, but I had stopped asking about Caleb. She once mentioned that he planned to transfer to another school the following year because he wanted a fresh environment. I listened, wished him well, and changed the subject. His life was becoming information I could hear without feeling responsible for what happened next. Back at work, a colleague asked whether the breakup had made me afraid to love someone again. I told her I used to be more afraid of starting over, but now I knew staying with someone who was unsure about choosing me would have been worse. When I returned home after Asheville, I opened the closet where I had stored the wedding binder. I took it out, cleared the shelf, and placed my leadership course materials there instead. The space looked ordinary, but to me it felt like proof that my life was no longer waiting for the future I had lost. A year later, what surprised me most was not what Caleb had lost. It was how I had stopped measuring my life against the things that were supposed to happen. I had accepted the operations manager position at the dispatch center, and the work challenged me in ways I had once postponed for wedding planning. The townhouse still belonged to me, but it felt like my home again. I had changed the room we once planned to use for guests into a reading and workspace. The shelves held training manuals, books, and notes from the leadership program I had finished months earlier. There were no wedding boxes left in the closet. I no longer walked through the house thinking about the version of my life that had disappeared. One afternoon, a letter arrived from Caleb. He did not ask me to take him back. He wrote that therapy had helped him understand that what he called clarity had been a way to keep safety while chasing excitement. He apologized for treating the stability I brought into his life like something small or disappointing. I read the letter once at my kitchen table. For a few minutes, I thought about the woman who had sat across from him in that restaurant, still wearing an engagement ring while he asked for 90 days to decide whether he wanted someone else. I did not feel angry at her anymore. I only wished she had known sooner that uncertainty was already an answer. I did not call Caleb, and I did not write back. I placed the letter in the shred bin with paperwork and went back to my evening. I learned that the most dangerous kind of love is not always someone leaving you for another person. Sometimes it is someone loving the safety you provide enough to keep you close, but not respecting you enough to choose you fully. If someone asks you to stand still while they search for a better future, you do not have to become better at waiting. You are allowed to choose your future first, freely.